What happens when a man gives everything to a brotherhood that never plans to keep him? This story is not about rebellion or redemption. It follows a slow exchange of loyalty for access, strength for permission. Documents show promotions granted, risks absorbed, and decisions made quietly. Power here is procedural. When usefulness fades, names fade faster. What remains is a record of how ambition is processed, not remembered. The ending was decided early, long before consequences became visible to anyone. The search for structure.
The larger barger, because he designed it, and he gave it rules. He gave the club rules like no shooting dope, no smoking it.
Charles Pee Wee Goldsmith entered the world without a father present, and that absence shaped his earliest understanding of order. His mother raised him alone in Milwaukee, a city defined by routine, work, and tight neighborhoods. The environment offered stability, but it did not offer the hierarchy he would later seek. School came easily. Marriage came early. A daughter arrived before graduation, followed quickly by a son. By his early 20s, he resembled a settled man. Yet, stability did not resolve his underlying need for male approval and direction. That need remained active, waiting for a system that would recognize effort and reward obedience with belonging. Kickboxing became the first structure that responded to his discipline. Training imposed rules. Competition created rank. Victory produced attention. Goldsmith advanced quickly, building a reputation through physical dominance and endurance. Championships followed, and with them came a sense of power that was measured publicly. Still, the sport ended when the match ended. It did not offer permanence. It did not demand lifelong loyalty. It did not replace the missing authority he had been searching for. Fighting paid him recognition, but not submission to something larger. That difference mattered more to him than titles. When Goldsmith encountered the Sinners MC in Wisconsin, he saw an opening. The group was small, informal, and disorganized. They had no clubhouse, minimal dues, and no protection. What they did have was a name and the appearance of brotherhood. Goldsmith joined and immediately began reorganizing. Membership grew, social gatherings became routine, families were included. Authority consolidated around him without formal resistance. He became president by consensus, not challenge. The club functioned because he provided structure, momentum, and direction. For a brief period, it resembled the hierarchy he had imagined. He was central, he was needed. The Sinners dissolved quietly afterward. No retaliation followed, no formal declaration was made. Members dispersed and returned to private lives. The club did not survive contact with an established system. Goldsmith was left alone with the consequences of defiance. The structure he built vanished because it was unsupported by a larger network. What remained was a lesson about hierarchy. Power did not reward effort alone. It recognized alignment. The failure did not discourage him. It clarified his target. The Sinners were never the goal. They were a rehearsal. Contact with the ideal. In 1991, at a motorcycle event in Humboldt, Iowa, Goldsmith encountered a Hells Angels member in person for the first time. The moment mattered because it converted abstraction into proximity. Until then, the club had existed as an idea shaped by reputation, rumor, and distance. Seeing the patch worn by a man who carried himself without explanation changed the scale of Goldsmith's ambition. He did not ask about rules or expectations. He asked how to join. The answer was brief and directional. Come where we are. The response implied movement, sacrifice, and compliance. It did not offer reassurance. Relocation followed. Goldsmith moved his family from Milwaukee to Minnesota, choosing proximity over security. The decision was framed internally as commitment. It functioned practically as leverage. Prospecting required availability and endurance. Domestic stability became secondary. Within the Minneapolis chapter, authority was centralized and personal. The club president controlled access, evaluation, and punishment. Tasks assigned to prospects were not designed to teach skills. They were designed to test obedience under uncertainty. Goldsmith complied consistently. He accepted hazing, isolation, and surveillance as necessary filters rather than warnings. Internal suspicion was routine. Physical size, prior leadership experience, and confidence drew scrutiny rather than respect. Goldsmith was subjected to a lie detector examination administered without transparency. Questions focused on intent, loyalty, and past cooperation with law enforcement. Passing did not resolve distrust. It delayed removal. During this period, the club expanded into contested territory. Violence between motorcycle clubs increased across the Midwest. Killings occurred. Lists circulated. Goldsmith's name appeared among those targeted by rival groups. Exposure was treated as proof of involvement. Survival was treated as an expectation. As pressure increased externally, blame shifted internally. When outcomes could not be controlled, responsibility was reassigned. Goldsmith's visibility made him a convenient container for uncertainty. He was accused of speaking too freely. No evidence was provided. Another lie detector test followed. This time, the result justified a predetermined outcome. He was rejected. The explanation was administrative. He was not cut out. The removal was procedural, not emotional. Years of compliance were rendered irrelevant by a single designation. The system closed without explanation and moved on. The rejection did not produce withdrawal. It produced escalation. Goldsmith interpreted exclusion as misalignment rather than judgment. He believed acceptance existed elsewhere within the same organization. At the Sturgis rally, he encountered Sonny Barger, a figure whose authority extended beyond chapter boundaries. The interaction was limited but decisive. Barger did not intervene directly. He did not promise inclusion. He allowed the possibility. That permission mattered more than certainty. It reframed rejection as temporary and localized. Building a useful man. Las Vegas was not neutral ground. It was already divided among law enforcement priorities, organized crime interests, and informal agreements that limited open conflict. When Goldsmith arrived to establish a Hells Angels presence, he did so under surveillance. Local detectives documented meetings, vehicles, and associations from the first day. The club's arrival was treated as a provocation rather than an event. Goldsmith understood this and adjusted his leadership style accordingly. He emphasized order, predictability, and restraint. Public behavior was controlled. Internal discipline was enforced. The goal was coexistence long enough to normalize presence. Negotiations with existing power structures followed. Goldsmith met with representatives connected to the Italian mob, including a senior figure who controlled multiple revenue streams in the city. The agreement reached was narrow and conditional. The Hells Angels would be permitted to operate socially and territorially, but not economically. Why? In ways that disrupted established operations. Drug trafficking, prostitution, and similar enterprises were explicitly restricted. Goldsmith accepted the terms and later described them as pragmatic. The agreement did not grant autonomy, it granted tolerance. Violation would not require explanation. Internally, Goldsmith positioned himself as a stabilizer. He instituted rules against unauthorized activity that could draw attention. He limited who could speak with outsiders. He enforced attendance and accountability. These measures were not ideological, they were functional. A quiet club survived longer. Law enforcement did not interpret restraint as compliance. Raids continued. Warrants were executed. Informants were suspected. Each interaction increased pressure. Goldsmith's claim of a clean operation conflicted with police assumptions and institutional memory. The club was treated as a criminal, regardless of internal policy. Rival clubs did not respect negotiated boundaries. The Mongols viewed Las Vegas as a contested space. Tension escalated through surveillance, threats, and proximity. Goldsmith was targeted directly during a drive through a fast food restaurant. A gunman fired through his vehicle, injuring him but not killing him. The attack occurred in front of his wife. The injury healed, the exposure did not. Domestic ultimata followed. Leave the club or lose the marriage. Goldsmith did not negotiate. He interpreted the choice as already made. The aftermath was administrative. Warrants were issued. Goldsmith was arrested and later released on bond. During the process, he communicated with investigators. The nature and extent of cooperation violated the club's bylaws. Silence was not a preference, it was a requirement. The violation was documented internally and judged quickly. Goldsmith was stripped of his position, patch, and affiliation. The language used was final. He was labeled a liability. His prior contributions were not debated. They were archived. Imprisonment followed on multiple charges. His wife filed for separation. His son severed contact. The club did not intervene. No statements were issued. The structure continued without him. Another president was appointed. Operations resumed. Goldsmith served his sentence and was released after several years. By then, his usefulness had expired. He was no longer protected, recognized, or referenced. The system he had served did not acknowledge loss. It acknowledged replacement. Removal without ceremony.
They bring me in a room and Pat says, "Are you ready to do this? You want to be Hell's Angel?"
Release from prison did not come with reintegration. Goldsmith exited custody with no standing inside the organization he had built space for. The designation applied to him internally was absolute. He was not inactive, he was erased. Former contacts avoided him. Communication channels closed without explanation. The same system that once monitored his availability now treated his presence as contamination. The transition was efficient and unemotional. It did not require threats, it required silence. Outside the club, his reputation did not convert into protection. The patch had functioned as identification, authority, and deterrence. Without it, his size and history offered no leverage. He moved cautiously, aware that prior visibility had not disappeared. Law enforcement continued to associate him with organized crime. Rival clubs remembered conflicts without considering the current status. He occupied a position of exposure without affiliation. This condition was more dangerous than membership because it offered no mediation. Attempts to rebuild family ties failed unevenly. His daughter maintained limited contact, shaped by familiarity with instability. His son refused reconciliation. The wedding incident had become the boundary. To the son, the club had replaced paternal judgment. That assessment did not require argument. It required distance. Goldsmith's marriage dissolved quietly. Legal separation followed patterns consistent with long-term strain. The organization that had demanded priority now did not assist. Loss occurred without negotiation. Financial stability deteriorated. Employment options were limited by record and reputation. Physical decline followed years of injury and confinement. The attributes that once made him useful were no longer scarce. Strength without authority had no application. Discipline without access produced isolation. Goldsmith remained articulate about the past, but cautious in assigning blame. He described processes rather than people. Decisions were framed as structural rather than personal. This was consistent with how removal had been executed. Internally, the Hells Angels adjusted to his absence without disruption. Las Vegas operations continued under new leadership. Agreements with other groups were reassessed. Law enforcement strategies adapted. None of these developments required reference to Goldsmith. His name appeared only in case files and older intelligence reports. Replacement occurred without ceremony. That was the point. Visibility had been a function of utility, not recognition. Goldsmith's reflections emphasized a single pattern. Contribution did not guarantee retention. Sacrifice did not create obligation. Loyalty was evaluated daily against risk. When risk exceeded value, removal followed. The process did not require malice. It required a procedure. This understanding emerged slowly, not as revelation, but as inventory. Each memory reinforced the same conclusion. The organization did not punish betrayal. It eliminated uncertainty. Years later, Goldsmith existed adjacent to the mythology he once pursued. Public narratives emphasized brotherhood and permanence. His experience contradicted neither explicitly. It contextualized them. Brotherhood operated within defined limits. Permanence applied to the structure, not the individual. Those distinctions were not advertised. They were enforced quietly through policy and precedent. What remained was a man shaped by a hierarchy that no longer acknowledged him. His survival did not translate into victory. It translated into observation. The machine he had entered continued to operate at scale, absorbing new participants and releasing them as needed. His story did not end with conflict. It ended with administrative closure. The most consequential decision occurred without confrontation, documentation, or appeal. The illusion of brotherhood. Public descriptions of motorcycle clubs rely heavily on language about family, loyalty, and shared sacrifice. These words function as recruitment tools more than promises. Goldsmith encountered this gap early, but chose to interpret it as a challenge rather than a warning. Within the Hells Angels, fraternity existed, but it was conditional. Bonds formed through proximity and shared exposure, not sentiment. Trust was transactional and constantly reassessed. Men were valued for what they could absorb without destabilizing the structure. Goldsmith believed endurance created protection. He believed that staying present during conflict established credibility that could not be reversed. This assumption was common among prospects and members alike. It was also incorrect. The organization measured individuals by current utility, not historical effort. Past service did not offset present liability. The language of brotherhood obscured this reality without altering it. When Goldsmith was useful, the rhetoric aligned with his experience. When he became inconvenient, the rhetoric disappeared. Hierarchy governed all interactions. Decisions flowed downward and were rarely explained upward. This was not secrecy for its own sake. It reduced debate. Members understood outcomes without needing justification. Goldsmith rose within this system because he accepted that arrangement. As president in Las Vegas, he enforced the same principles he had been subjected to. He demanded availability. He disciplined deviation. He prioritized club interests over personal considerations. The system rewarded him until it did not. Conflict with rival clubs reinforced internal cohesion temporarily. External threats simplified internal evaluation. When Mongols targeted Goldsmith, the response emphasized resilience. Surviving an attack demonstrated commitment. It did not generate immunity. Exposure to violence increased scrutiny rather than trust. Law enforcement pressure following the wedding incident shifted the balance. The club assessed risk, not intent. Goldsmith's cooperation with authorities, regardless of context, altered his classification. Silence was not a value. It was a rule. Removal did not require consensus. It required confirmation. Once documentation established a breach, the process concluded. The absence of debate did not reflect unity. It reflected efficiency. The system did not seek to humiliate him publicly. It removed access and redistributed responsibility. His patch was reclaimed. His position was reassigned. Communication ceased. The organization preserved its continuity by treating the event as administrative rather than emotional. Goldsmith's personal losses were not unique within this context. Families were frequently secondary to operational needs. Relationships eroded under strain. The organization did not intervene unless outcomes threatened stability. Individual suffering was incidental. The system did not require cruelty to produce damage. It required indifference. Endow, undow, endow. What Goldsmith encountered was not betrayal in the emotional sense. It was enforcement. The rules he accepted applied to him without exception. Brotherhood had never been unconditional. It had been contingent, procedural, and revocable. Understanding this did not restore what was lost. It provided clarity. The clarity arrived too late to matter operationally. The system had already moved on, intact and unaffected. When usefulness becomes risk, Goldsmith's value to the organization declined in stages rather than abruptly. Each stage corresponded to a shift in how his presence affected outcomes. As president in Las Vegas, he had been effective because he absorbed attention while maintaining order. Law enforcement focused on him as a point of contact. Rival clubs targeted him as a symbol of expansion. Both roles were manageable as long as control remained intact. The problem emerged when exposure outpaced containment. The shooting in the drive-thru altered internal calculations. Surviving an attack demonstrated resilience, but it also signaled vulnerability. His family witnessed the event. Domestic pressure followed. Emotional strain increased the likelihood of deviation. The organization did not respond to this directly. It monitored behavior. When personal conflict began to intersect with public incidents, the margin narrowed. The wedding confrontation represented a failure of compartmentalization. The event combined family, rivals, and public visibility. Violence at a private ceremony removed plausible deniability. It created documentation. Law enforcement did not need interpretation. Photographs, injuries, and witness statements were sufficient. The club assessed the incident without regard to provocation. It assessed the outcome. The outcome was increased scrutiny. Goldsmith's subsequent interaction with investigators was evaluated strictly. Intent was irrelevant. Context was irrelevant. Communication itself constituted a breach. The organization's code prioritized insulation from state authority above all else. Cooperation, even minimal, introduced uncertainty. Uncertainty was treated as contagion. The decision to remove him was framed as preventative, not punitive. After removal, his narrative shifted from asset to cautionary reference. Internally, his case illustrated the limits of autonomy. Presidents were not sovereign, they were managers. When management decisions created liability, removal was expected, replacement restored equilibrium. The structure demonstrated resilience by functioning without disruption. Outside the organization, Goldsmith encountered a different form of exposure. Law enforcement interest persisted. Former rivals did not acknowledge his change in status. He was known but unaffiliated. This condition offered no leverage. It required caution without protection. The organization did not intervene because the intervention offered no benefit. The concept of loyalty shifted in his understanding. He recognized that loyalty was not measured by sacrifice alone, it was measured by predictability. When actions became difficult to forecast, loyalty was considered compromised. The organization favored controllable participants over committed ones. Commitment without control was a risk. Goldsmith's earlier successes contributed to his removal. His initiative had expanded the club into contested space. That expansion created obligations and enemies. When those variables became unstable, the individual associated with them became expendable. The organization did not retreat from Las Vegas. It changed personnel. This pattern was not unique. It reflected how large, decentralized organizations preserve continuity. Individuals are inserted into roles. Roles are evaluated against outcomes. When outcomes degrade, roles are reassigned. Personal history does not alter this cycle. Goldsmith experienced it from both sides. As a leader, he enforced it. As a subject, he absorbed it. The transition from usefulness to risk was not dramatic. It was procedural. The system did not need to escalate. It needed to be adjusted. Goldsmith's survival did not alter that adjustment. Survival did not equal retention. The organization did not require his consent. It required resolution. Life after removal. After release, Goldsmith discovered that absence inside a system does not equal freedom outside it. His name still circulated in databases, reports, and informal warnings. Law enforcement treated him as a residual risk rather than a former participant. Interviews were brief and procedural. Surveillance did not resume aggressively, but it never fully stopped. He existed in a state of administrative memory, present enough to monitor, irrelevant enough to ignore unless needed. Social isolation followed predictable patterns. Former associates did not return calls. Some acknowledged him in public spaces without engagement. Others avoided proximity entirely. This was not hostility, it was maintenance. Contact with removed individuals created no advantage and potential liability. Silence preserved alignment. Goldsmith understood this intellectually before he accepted it emotionally. The realization arrived gradually, through repetition rather than confrontation. Attempts to reconstruct identity proved difficult. His previous roles had been defined by hierarchy and assignment. Without those structures, decision-making became unanchored. Work opportunities were limited. Physical labor aggravated old injuries. Visibility without affiliation produced caution from employers. Reputation functioned as a barrier rather than a credential. The traits that once commanded authority now generated hesitation. Family relationships did not repair with time. Distance hardened into routine. His daughter maintained conditional contact, shaped by familiarity with instability. Conversations avoided the past. His son's refusal remained absolute. The wedding incident had become symbolic rather than specific. It represented a boundary crossed that could not be renegotiated. Goldsmith did not contest this interpretation publicly. He accepted it privately with difficulty. Psychological adjustment did not follow a linear path. He did not express regret in conventional terms. He analyzed decisions in sequence, identifying points of no return. The emphasis remained on structure rather than emotion. This framing allowed coherence but limited relief. Understanding the system did not mitigate loss, it explained it. The organization's continued operation reinforced his marginality. New members were patched in, chapters expanded and contracted, conflicts evolved. None of these developments referenced him. The absence of acknowledgement confirmed the finality of removal. He was not a fallen leader, he was an administrative conclusion. His story existed only where it intersected with active concerns. Goldsmith occasionally spoke about the club in controlled settings. His language avoided accusation. He described processes, expectations, and outcomes. This restraint reflected internalized norms. Even outside the organization, he maintained its vocabulary. The system had shaped how he interpreted experience. Detachment replaced anger, analysis replaced grievance. The contrast between myth and procedure became clearer over time. Public narratives celebrated endurance and brotherhood. His lived experience emphasized conditional access and quiet removal. Both could coexist without contradiction because they served different functions. Myth attracted participation. The procedure preserved stability. Goldsmith's life after removal did not collapse suddenly. It contracted, opportunities narrowed, networks dissolved, identity lost context. The process mirrored how he had once watched smaller clubs disappear after contact with larger ones. The pattern repeated at a different scale. He was no longer central, he was adjacent. What remained was awareness. He understood that survival within such systems depended less on strength than on continued alignment. Once alignment failed, recovery was not an option. Replacement followed naturally. His continued existence did not challenge that logic, it confirmed it. The myth versus the record. Public mythology around outlaw motorcycle clubs persists because it is rarely tested against internal records. Stories emphasize defiance, unity, and permanence. Documentation emphasizes compliance, hierarchy, and replacement. Goldsmith's trajectory exposes the distance between these two accounts. His rise and removal followed established patterns that were neither exceptional nor personal. They were procedural. The myth required belief. The record required only confirmation. Inside the organization, narratives were controlled through repetition and selective memory. Successes were attributed to collective strength. Failures were isolated to individuals. Goldsmith benefited from this framework while his outcomes aligned with organizational goals. When those outcomes shifted, the framework reclassified him without revision. The story adjusted itself. His contributions were absorbed into the institution's history without attribution. His removal required no explanation because the system did not rely on transparency to maintain cohesion. Externally, law enforcement maintained its own narrative. Goldsmith was categorized as a former leader with residual influence. Intelligence files did not distinguish between active and removed status in practical terms. Risk assessments focused on capacity rather than affiliation. His physical presence and history sustained interest regardless of current alignment. The system treated identity as persistent, even when membership was not. This asymmetry left him exposed without support. Goldsmith's understanding of loyalty evolved under this pressure. Loyalty inside the club had been directional. It flowed upward and inward. Once removed, no reciprocal obligation remained. Loyalty did not follow individuals beyond their functional roles. This realization reframed past interactions. Acts he had interpreted as trust were revealed as oversight. Relationships he believed were mutual were contingent on shared utility. The contrast between internal and external perceptions produced isolation. To the club, he was resolved. To the authorities, he was unresolved. This gap limited movement and opportunity. He existed between classifications without agency to alter either. Attempts to assert distance from his past were ineffective. Attempts to reclaim relevance were unnecessary. Both approaches misunderstood how systems retain information. Goldsmith did not challenge the myth publicly. He recognized its utility. The mythology protected the organization by simplifying its image. Complexity existed internally, managed through policy rather than narrative. By speaking only in process terms, he avoided contradiction. His restraint was not strategic, it was conditioned. Years of internal discipline shaped how he articulated experience. The record tells a quieter story. It shows how ambition is harnessed and then released. It documents how systems reward initiative until initiative introduces volatility. It illustrates how hierarchy absorbs individuals without preserving them. Goldsmith's case fits this pattern precisely. There is no anomaly to explain. The absence of exception is the point. Over time, memory within the organization adjusted. New members learned about boundaries without learning names. Lessons were abstracted. Goldsmith's removal functioned as a precedent without requiring retelling. The system did not need to remember him. It needed to remember the rule he violated. That rule remained intact. What persisted was the structure. Individuals entered and exited. Leadership rotated. Conflicts evolved. The organization's identity remained stable because it was not dependent on any single participant. Goldsmith's experience did not undermine the myth. It sustained it by demonstrating the cost of misalignment. The record did not argue. It documented. Power without sentiment. Goldsmith's experience clarified a principle that governs large criminal organizations. Power is not emotional. It does not remember favors. It does not preserve narratives for the sake of fairness. It functions through assessment and adjustment. Individuals are inputs. Outcomes determine retention. Sentiment complicates this process and is therefore excluded wherever possible. During his rise, Goldsmith mistook proximity to decision-makers for influence over decisions. He interpreted access as trust. In reality, access was a function of role. Presidents were expected to absorb pressure, enforce policy, and remain interchangeable. Authority existed to stabilize operations, not to personalize them. When Goldsmith fulfilled these expectations, his authority appeared substantial. When circumstances shifted, the limits became visible. The Hells Angels did not rely on charisma to govern. They relied on precedent. Precedent removed the need for debate. Goldsmith's removal followed earlier removals that had set an acceptable procedure. There was no need to justify the decision internally because it aligned with established responses to similar risks. This continuity preserved organizational coherence. Members understood the action without requiring explanation. Sentiment was not absent at the individual level. Members formed attachments and histories. What mattered was that sentiment did not override structure. When Goldsmith was designated a liability, any personal loyalty held by others became irrelevant. Acting on sentiment would have introduced inconsistency. Inconsistency threatened predictability. Predictability preserved power. The hierarchy favored stability over relationships. Goldsmith had enforced this logic himself. As president, he disciplined members whose behavior attracted attention or deviated from policy. He justified those decisions as necessary for survival. At the time, he did not question the fairness of the removal because fairness was not the metric. Function was. When the same logic was applied to him, the outcome felt abrupt but not irrational. The system behaved as designed. The absence of retaliation after his removal illustrated the same principle. Violence would have served no operational purpose. Goldsmith was already neutralized through exclusion. Eliminating him physically would have increased law enforcement attention without improving control. The organization chose the least disruptive option. Silence achieved the objective efficiently. Outside observers often assume criminal organizations rely on fear to maintain order. Fear plays a role, but it is secondary. Order is maintained through clarity. Members know what actions trigger consequences. They observe how quickly alignment is rewarded and how quietly deviation is resolved. Goldsmith's case provided that clarity. His survival was irrelevant. His removal was instructional. Over time, Goldsmith recognized that power within the organization was less about domination than about management. Decisions were not dramatic. They were incremental and often reversible until they were not. Once a threshold was crossed, reversal was unnecessary. The system did not reconsider, it replaced. This understanding altered how he interpreted earlier moments. Promotions were no longer signs of esteem. They were acknowledgements of capacity. Conflict with rivals was no longer proof of honor. It was evidence of exposure. Sacrifice did not generate credit. It increased investment, which raised expectations and scrutiny. When expectations were no longer met, investment was written off. What remained after comprehension was restraint. Goldsmith did not attempt to reinsert himself into narratives of betrayal or injustice. He recognized that such narratives assumed a level of mutual obligation that never existed. Power did not betray him. It processed him. In this sense, his experience was not exceptional. It was representative. The system did not require villains or victims to function. It required roles. When roles expired, individuals followed. Power remained intact and indifferent. Replacement as resolution. Goldsmith's removal did not leave a vacuum. That absence is often misunderstood by outsiders who expect disruption when leadership changes. In reality, the organization anticipated removal as a routine possibility. Contingencies existed. Roles were defined independently of the individuals occupying them. When Goldsmith was stripped of his patch, the position of Las Vegas president did not disappear. It transferred. The transition occurred without announcement because it did not require acknowledgement to function. Replacement served multiple purposes. It stabilized operations, reassured allied groups, and signaled continuity to members. Most importantly, it demonstrated that authority did not reside in personality. It resided in a structure. Goldsmith had believed his years of effort made him indispensable. The system demonstrated otherwise by proceeding without delay. His absence became proof of design rather than a problem to solve. Internally, members adapted quickly. Loyalty realigned around the new leadership because loyalty was directional. It flowed toward whoever represented sanctioned authority. This adjustment did not require explanation or persuasion. Members understood that survival depended on recognizing where power currently sat. Attachment to former leadership offered no advantage. Silence preserved access. For those who had served under Goldsmith, the shift was instructive. His fall illustrated the limits of initiative. Expansion had been permitted because it aligned with broader objectives. When expansion increased exposure, initiative became liability. The system responded by reassigning responsibility. The lesson was absorbed without ceremony. Future decisions reflected increased caution rather than resistance. Replacement also reframed Goldsmith's legacy. His work establishing the Las Vegas Charter remained embedded in the organization's footprint, but his name detached from it. Achievements were retained without attribution. This separation protected the institution from associating success with individuals who might later become liabilities. History was preserved in outcomes, not authorship. The process revealed how power manages risk over time. Organizations that rely on individuals for continuity become fragile. Organizations that rely on roles remain resilient. Goldsmith had provided momentum, but momentum could be generated again. What mattered was not who started the process, but who currently controlled it. Control was transferable. Identity was not. From Goldsmith's perspective, replacement felt like erasure. From the organization's perspective, it was a resolution. A problem had been identified, isolated, and addressed. No further action was necessary. The system returned to baseline. This efficiency explained its longevity. Conflict was not prolonged. Disputes were not personalized. Resolution occurred through administrative means. The broader environment reinforced this approach. Law enforcement adjusted surveillance to the new leadership. Rival clubs recalibrated threat assessments. Agreements with other groups were renegotiated or maintained as needed. None of these processes referenced Goldsmith. His removal simplified external calculations by clarifying who now spoke for the organization. Goldsmith's continued existence did not challenge replacement. He did not possess authority, resources, or affiliation. His knowledge of internal processes was outdated. His value as an asset was minimal. The system did not require further containment. Replacement had resolved the risk. The finality of replacement lies in its quietness. There is no confrontation to contest. There is no narrative to dispute. The decision is already implemented by the time it is recognized. Goldsmith did not lose power through defeat. He lost it through substitution. In that sense, his story is less about downfall than about continuity. The system did not break him to survive. It replaced him. Survival belonged to the structure, not the man. The cost of belonging. Goldsmith's pursuit of belonging followed a consistent pattern. Each step required greater sacrifice and offered diminishing returns. Early involvement promised identity. Deeper involvement demanded separation from anything that competed with organizational priority. Family, health, and autonomy were not explicitly taken. They were rendered incompatible. The choice to remain belonged to the individual. but the conditions shaping that choice were not negotiable. Belonging inside the organization was defined by availability. Members were expected to respond without delay and without question. This expectation extended beyond tasks into personal life. Goldsmith accepted this early, interpreting it as proof of commitment. Over time, availability replaced agency. Decisions were framed as obligations rather than preferences. The system did not need to coerce compliance. It relied on internalized expectation. As responsibilities increased, personal relationships deteriorated. Goldsmith's marriage absorbed years of absence, stress, and exposure. The drive-through shooting marked a turning point because it translated abstract risk into immediate danger for his wife. Her ultimatum did not challenge his loyalty. It highlighted its cost. Goldsmith chose the organization without deliberation. That decision clarified priorities, but narrowed future options. His relationship with his son followed a similar trajectory. Allowing his son to prospect was framed as inclusion. It also extended organizational exposure into the next generation. The wedding incident transformed admiration into rejection. The son's refusal to reconcile did not require justification. It reflected an assessment that the organization had overridden parental judgment. That assessment did not change with time. Goldsmith's physical condition reflected years spent preparing for confrontation. Injuries accumulated. Recovery slowed. The organization did not account for long-term health. Utility was evaluated in the present. When capacity declined, consideration declined with it. There was no mechanism for transition. Aging members adapted or exited. Goldsmith exited under adverse conditions. Financial stability suffered accordingly. Income tied to the organization disappeared with the removal. Legal costs consumed savings. Employment prospects were constrained by record and reputation. The organization did not provide compensation or support after removal. Contributions were not treated as investments requiring return. They were treated as consumed resources. The cost of belonging became clearer in retrospect. Goldsmith recognized that the organization offered structure but not security. It demanded loyalty but did not guarantee protection. Membership granted access while alignment lasted. Once alignment failed, access ended completely. The transition did not account for personal fallout. That fallout was external to organizational concern. Goldsmith's reflections avoided framing himself as a victim. He described the exchange as uneven but explicit. He had accepted the terms as they were presented. The organization had enforced them consistently. What changed was his understanding of what those terms meant in practice. Belonging did not imply care. It implied a function. The cost was cumulative rather than singular. No single decision destroyed his family or stability. Each decision narrowed the margin. Over time, the margin disappeared. The organization did not intervene to stop this progression. It benefited from it until it did not. Goldsmith's story illustrates how belonging can be engineered to feel essential while remaining conditional. The desire to be included becomes leverage. Sacrifice becomes proof. Proof becomes expectation. When expectation exceeds capacity, removal follows. The cost is borne entirely by the individual. The system remains unchanged. Silence as enforcement. After the removal, Goldsmith expected confrontation. He anticipated threats, warnings, or at least acknowledgement. None arrived. The absence of response was deliberate. Silence functioned as enforcement. By refusing engagement, the organization denied him relevance. There was no conflict to respond to because, internally, the matter was closed. Silence communicated finality more effectively than violence could have. This method served multiple purposes. It reduced exposure by avoiding escalation. It preserved deniability by leaving no traceable action. Most importantly, it reinforced hierarchy. Only those within the structure were entitled to communication. Once removed, Goldsmith no longer qualified as an audience member. The system did not explain itself to those it had already processed. For the remaining members, the silence carried instruction. They observed what happened after the breach. There were no negotiations, no appeals, and no aftermath. Life inside the organization continued uninterrupted. This demonstrated that removal did not destabilize operations. It also demonstrated that emotional responses were unnecessary. The message was clear without being spoken. Silence extended to practical matters. Goldsmith did not receive warnings about threats or disputes that might affect him indirectly. He was no longer protected by internal channels. At the same time, he was no longer targeted by them. The organization had no interest in maintaining contact or exerting control. Distance achieved the same outcome with less effort. The psychological effect of silence was cumulative. Without confrontation, there was nothing to resist. Without acknowledgement, there was nothing to contest. Goldsmith was left to interpret events alone. This isolation amplified the sense of erasure. He was not defeated publicly. He was simply excluded from the narrative entirely. Law enforcement's silence mirrored this pattern differently. Investigators maintained files but reduced contact. Goldsmith was no longer operationally relevant. He was not pursued aggressively, but he was not cleared. This administrative silence left him suspended between classifications, neither threat nor ally. He remained a subject without priority. In social contexts, silence became avoidance. Former associates crossed streets rather than engage. Conversations ended quickly. The absence of hostility made the behavior harder to challenge. There was no argument to refute. Silence functioned as a consensus without discussion. Goldsmith eventually recognized silence as an intentional mechanism rather than neglect. It allowed the organization to enforce boundaries without action. It conserved resources. It avoided risk. Most importantly, it prevented removed individuals from influencing those still inside. Engagement could produce doubt. Silence prevented it. This approach aligned with how the organization handled internal disputes more broadly. Matters were resolved through absence rather than confrontation. Members who violated expectations were reassigned, isolated, or removed quietly. The lack of spectacle preserved stability. It also reinforced the perception that power was impersonal and inevitable. Over time, silence replaced anger. There was nothing to react against. The absence of response drained momentum from the grievance. This was not forgiveness. It was exhaustion. The system had outlasted the impulse to confront it. Silence also protected the organization's mythology. Public disputes would have exposed internal mechanics. Quiet removal preserved the image of unity. Those outside could continue to believe in permanence. Those inside understood the cost of deviation without needing explanation. For Goldsmith, silence became the final confirmation of how power operated. Not through dominance, but through withdrawal. Not through threat, but through exclusion. The organization did not need to end him. It needed only to stop recognizing him. Survival without victory. Goldsmith survived every stage that should have ended him. He survived rival clubs, gunfire, prison, and removal. Survival, however, did not translate into leverage. It did not restore the position. It did not compel reconsideration. Survival existed outside the metrics that governed advancement and retention. The organization did not measure endurance as success. It measured alignment. After release, Goldsmith recognized that remaining alive did not disrupt the system that excluded him. The structure had accounted for his absence and continued to function. Survival created time but not opportunity. Time alone did not alter classification. The organization did not revisit closed decisions unless conditions changed materially. In his case, they did not. This distinction altered how he interpreted earlier milestones. Each test he had passed had not moved him closer to permanence. It had merely delayed evaluation. Passing meant continuation, not accumulation. Failure meant removal. There was no ledger of credit. There was only the current status. Survival extended the process. It did not change its terms. Goldsmith's physical resilience had once been central to his identity. In the aftermath, resilience became irrelevant. The organization had no mechanism to convert resilience into renewed trust. The qualities that allowed him to withstand punishment were not the same qualities that reduced risk. Predictability mattered more than toughness. Silence mattered more than strength. The idea of winning lost coherence. There was no final match, no decisive confrontation. His exit did not conclude a rivalry or settle a score. It resolved an administrative problem. Replacement addressed exposure. Silence maintained distance. Survival occurred in parallel without effect. Victory would have required reintegration. Reintegration was never offered. Goldsmith observed others cycle through similar processes at lower levels. Prospects removed quietly, members reassigned, leaders replaced. The pattern repeated without acknowledgement. Survival did not interrupt the cycle. It reinforced it by demonstrating that removal did not require elimination. The organization did not need to end lives to preserve control. It needed only to manage access. This realization carried a particular weight. Goldsmith had believed survival would force recognition. It did not. Recognition flowed from alignment, not endurance. Once alignment failed, recognition ended. Survival existed outside the system's field of concern. The organization neither rewarded nor punished it. It ignored it. Financial and social consequences continued without intervention. Medical issues accumulated. Work remained unstable. Relationships stayed fractured. These outcomes were not retaliatory. They were residual. The system did not design them. It allowed them. Indifference functioned as an outcome. Goldsmith's narrative avoided framing his experience as unjust. He described it as precise. The organization applied its rules consistently. He had accepted those rules without fully understanding their implications. The understanding arrived after removal, when adaptation required resources he no longer had. In this context, survival became a personal condition rather than an organizational one. It mattered to him, not to the structure he had served. The organization's timeline did not intersect with his recovery. Its priorities did not include rehabilitation or reconciliation. It had already advanced. Goldsmith continued living with the knowledge that nothing he did after removal would alter the decision made about him. This knowledge did not bring peace. It brought finality. There was no path back, because there had never been a path designed for return. The difference between survival and victory became undeniable. Victory would have implied agency over outcome. Survival required none. It occurred by default. The organization did not lose when he survived. It did not win either. It proceeded. Survival existed alongside it, unnoticed. This distinction closed the narrative without ceremony, not with resolution, but with alignment to reality. Survival did not end the story. Replacement had already done that. The machine outlasts the man. Goldsmith's life after removal unfolded in the shadow of a structure that continued without reference to him. This was not an accident. Organizations built for endurance are designed to reduce dependency on individuals. The Hell's Angels operated through chapters, rules, and precedents that predated him and would persist after him. His rise and removal fit within that continuity. The machine did not adjust itself to his absence. It revealed that it never needed him to begin with. From the outside, this endurance appears impersonal. From the inside, it is essential. Systems that rely on memory, gratitude, or moral balance do not scale. They fracture under pressure. The organization avoided this by standardizing outcomes. When Goldsmith became unaligned, the response was not debate. It was a substitution. The machine resumed its function because it had been built to do so. Goldsmith's belief that contribution created permanence reflected a misunderstanding of scale. At the level of the individual, effort feels cumulative. At the level of the system, effort is interchangeable. His work establishing a charter mattered only insofar as the charter remained viable. Once viability could be preserved without him, his role ended. The machine did not erase his work. It detached it from him. This detachment extended to memory. Internally, stories were not told about Goldsmith. Names were unnecessary. The lesson his removal provided did not require attribution. It required repetition. New members learned boundaries through observation, not narrative. They saw what happened when exposure exceeded tolerance. They adjusted their behavior accordingly. The machine was trained without instruction. Goldsmith experienced this absence of legacy as erasure. The organization experienced it as efficiency. Legacy complicates governance by introducing expectation. Removing legacy preserves clarity. The machine did not owe an explanation to those it processed. It owed continuity to itself. That obligation guided every decision. The persistence of the organization reframed Goldsmith's losses. His family remained fractured. His health declined. His finances remained unstable. These outcomes unfolded while the machine continued expanding, contracting, and adapting. The parallel timelines did not intersect. His suffering did not slow operations. His absence did not require acknowledgement. The machine's indifference was not cruelty. It was designed. Goldsmith's reflections grew increasingly analytical. He spoke less about individuals and more about patterns. This shift reflected acceptance rather than resignation. He no longer expected recognition from a structure that could not provide it. He recognized that expecting sentiment from a machine was a category error. The organization did not betray him because betrayal requires a relationship. What existed was function. This understanding did not restore what was lost. It clarified why restoration was impossible. The machine had no mechanism to return what it consumed. It processed individuals into outcomes. Once processed, individuals exited the system permanently. Re-entry would have required a new function. None existed. The machine's endurance relied on this finality. Allowing return would have undermined authority. Authority depended on irreversible decisions. Goldsmith's removal demonstrated that reversibility was not part of the design. This certainty preserved control by eliminating ambiguity. As time passed, Goldsmith occupied a position entirely outside the system's concern. He was no longer a cautionary example. He was no longer relevant. The machine had moved on to other inputs, other evaluations, other removals. His story remained static while the system evolved. This imbalance revealed the central truth of his experience. Power does not engage in dialogue with those it outlasts. It continues. Individuals measure time through memory and consequence. Machines measure time through continuity. Goldsmith lived with the consequences. The organization preserved continuity. Both outcomes occurred simultaneously, without conflict. The machine did not need to defeat him. It needed only to persist. In that persistence, his role concluded. The man remained. The system endured. The quiet ending.
Things happened. Everybody asked me, are you mad? Are you resentful towards your dad because your life changed a lot? I just sucked it up and I says, this is what my family...
The final stage of Goldsmith's story does not arrive with confrontation or acknowledgement. It arrives through absence. No message follows. No correction is issued. The system does not revisit the decision. Time passes, and the distance between him and the organization becomes structural rather than emotional. This is how endings occur inside durable hierarchies. They do not announce themselves. They simply remain in effect. Goldsmith continues living with the consequences of choices that once appeared necessary. His body carries the cost of preparation for violence that no longer serves a purpose. His family remains fragmented by decisions that prioritized alignment over judgment. These outcomes persist without external pressure. The organization does not enforce them. It does not need to. They are self-sustaining. What becomes clear at this stage is that violence was never the decisive factor in his removal. Gunfire did not end his role. Prison did not end it. Confrontation did not end it. Replacement did. Once another man occupied his position, the system reached equilibrium. There was no incentive to revisit the past. The machine achieved resolution through substitution, not destruction. Goldsmith's survival exists alongside this resolution without intersecting it. He remains alive, aware, and articulate, yet irrelevant to the structure that once defined him. This irrelevance is not punitive, it is complete. The organization does not monitor his opinions or actions because they do not affect outcomes. His existence falls outside operational concern. The contrast between individual consequence and organizational continuity sharpens here. Goldsmith experiences memory as accumulation. Each decision carries weight forward. The system experiences memory as filtration. It retains only what informs future control. His name does not qualify. His story does not alter policy. The machine retains nothing that cannot be applied. This difference explains why the ending feels unfinished from a personal perspective. There is no acknowledgement of effort, no recognition of loss. The structure offers no closure because closure implies a relationship. What existed was function. When the function ended, so did relevance. Expecting closure misunderstands the nature of the system. Goldsmith does not attempt to reclaim meaning through opposition. He does not frame himself as an enemy or victim. He understands that doing so would grant the organization more presence in his life than it currently occupies. The quiet ending denies him even that conflict. What remains is observation without participation. The broader implication becomes unavoidable. Systems like this do not collapse under violence, they adapt. Individuals who believe they can force recognition through endurance misunderstand how power preserves itself. Power does not need to defeat those it can replace. Replacement is quieter, cheaper, and more effective. Goldsmith's story closes not because something dramatic occurs, but because nothing does. There is no return. There is no reconciliation. There is no reckoning. The machine continues operating at scale, absorbing new participants and discarding them when alignment fails. His absence does not register as a loss. It registers as a function completed. The man remains with memory, consequence, and time. The organization remains with structure, continuity, and silence. These outcomes are not symmetrical, and they are not meant to be. The system is designed to endure. Individuals are not. This is the uncomfortable conclusion that emerges without being stated. Survival does not alter power. Loyalty does not secure permanence. Violence does not end hierarchies. Replacement does. The ending is quiet because it was decided long before it was noticed.